Assalamu alaikum, peace be on all. A friend on Facebook was keeps asking me, matter of fact, about the hard problem of consciousness, and we can solve the hard problem of consciousness by assuming panpsychism and these type of presuppositions, philosophical presuppositions. So I'm just going to negate. I'm going to tackle two birds with one stone. Okay. It's going to be the same argument for both of them, panpsychism and pantheism, okay? So panpsychism is the definition that everything is conscious, and pantheism is the definition that everything is God, okay? And I've talked about this before in one of my videos where I was sitting in a car and discussing using a camera phone. In this video, the reason panpsychism is not a valid assumption, okay, because it is an assumption nonetheless, because Islamically we also have the same notion that everything is conscious of Allah, and I've given that definition before. Panpsychism is pretty much saying everything is conscious, that's it, and it stops you at that. It doesn't give you an explanation or a philosophical justification for why we as humans possess consciousness that is not the same as the animals. Okay, because we also have cognition and metacognition and all these things. It does not provide us an answer, because it's the same as when you ask an atheist, how do you account for your consciousness and meta and cognition and cognitive faculties? The atheist will tell you, I just have it, that's it. That's not a justification, that's not an explanation. And that's why in academia they're trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness. David Chalmers, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one who specializes in that field, and he talked about panpsychism as an assumption. Now, this is just from the top of my head, because I haven't read the works, and I don't think, to be honest with you, you don't need to really read the works, because this is a philosophical presupposition. If you're going to assume, I mean, you should if you want to, you should read the works if you're enthusiastic about it, but I'm not that enthusiastic, so I'll just give you my argument, my own negation against panpsychism and pantheism. They do not provide an explanation for conscious emergence. For example, we're human beings. We developed in the womb. There's a metaphysical causation, metaphysical process, a metaphysical link that we cannot detect via the microscope. We cannot detect that link, okay? All we can do is just detect the physical processes, not the metaphysical processes. And this is what consciousness is. How did it come to be, and why is it like that in the human state, in the human faculties? That is a question that panpsychism cannot answer. Panpsychism is almost like, okay, we're conscious because we're conscious. That's all panpsychism did. It's the same thing as when you ask the atheist, how do you justify your consciousness? It just is. That's not an explanation. It's neither scientific nor philosophical. So instead they said everything is conscious. It doesn't give you anything. It doesn't give you an answer. All you've done is you've taken consciousness from your own head and imposed it on everything else. So now everything is conscious. Therefore we're also conscious, and by nature, we basically get out of the womb, we're conscious, because that's how nature made us. It doesn't provide any justification or explanation. The same applies with pantheism. The same argument applies for pantheism. If everything is God, then more gods. That's polytheism, paganism. You know what I'm saying? Nothing is grounded. Okay? We can do as we please, why do we have a civilization? Why do we have a free will? What does not answer anything. And that's why Islam is a holistic worldview, provides us coherence, a coherent worldview that provides us with answers, philosophical justifications. We're just going to say, oh, this is it, and this is, and that's that, and that's not an explanation. Okay, so panpsychism. So you assume that consciousness is embedded in this world, but for some unknown reason, we were granted with a consciousness that makes us supreme or superior above the rest of the living creatures. Why us? It does not give us the why. It doesn't even tell us the how. You know, panpsychism is silent on these two things as a presupposition. Unless you're going to assume science, then that's not a panpsychism is not a scientific presup. It's philosophical. Why would you want to impose panpsychism as a presupposition in science? Then now you're operating based on methodological naturalism and not panpsychism. There'll be a conflict. You know what I mean? There'll be a conflict if you try to superimpose or impose or shoehorn panpsychism into the philosophy of science. One deals with physicalism, one is now assuming consciousness in everything. You can never answer the hard problem of consciousness with panpsychism or pantheism. And I know there's this guy who thinks he's a philosophically savvy, T-Jump, who comes on and says it's a genetic fallacy to say God. But here I solved the problem, panpsychism. Then he makes that face, you know, with his, I don't know how he does it, man, but as if he came up with something smart, pantheism. He'll actually say pantheism, not panpsychism. It doesn't do anything. Pantheism as well as panpsychism, they do not give us any answers. And he's making a fallacy of equivocation when he says pantheism is like assuming monotheism. It's not the same, because you're a shallow thinker. You have to look at monotheism first to know how to negate pantheism. But if you're going to look at pantheism to try to negate monotheism, then you wouldn't know how, because you're heedless about monotheism and what it entails. Monotheism, it's a personal God who granted us consciousness and cognition and metacognition so we can recognize his existence. Just like in Islamic, quote-unquote Islamic panpsychism, everything is conscious of Allah. Okay? So when you tell us pantheism and then you claim genetic fallacy, what the hell is that? It's not a genetic fallacy at all. God is a philosophical justification for all these metaphysical and physical things on this planet, all the creation. If you're just going to apply the scientific method, it's limited. Has no foot in the door for consciousness. Science of the gap. And then you want to presuppose pantheism as if you came up with an answer? That's paganism, man. That leads to nihilism. Both panpsychism and pantheism lead to panpsychism and pantheism lead to nihilism, because they don't answer the why and the how. They don't give you the how and the why rationally. All it does is says we're all gods, we're all conscious. That's it, and it leaves you at that. But why us? Why did we develop this consciousness? Listen, if you're going to try to basically take a monotheistic God, especially an Islamic God, out of the equation, you'll run into these problems that everyone is trying to solve. Science has no foot in the door, so let's use philosophy with a precept like panpsychism. and you still run into the problem. You know, if you keep following these steps, slowly but surely, you'll eventually say God. Eventually you'll have to say the Abrahamic God. There's no other choice. I mean, it seems like you are climbing up the ladder slowly. From naturalism, physicalism, reductive materialism, then pantheism, panpsychism, and then eventually monotheism, because that's it. After monotheism, there's nothing. You cannot really come up with something better. If you can, go be my guest. But that's what it is. Consciousness. How do you reach a higher state of consciousness? Through interacting with the transcendental being, supreme conscious. The supreme conscious being. That's how you gain a higher state of consciousness. That's how you become also attain knowledge. You know? And there's a method for going through these things. You have to kill the ego and so on. But when you assume panpsychism, it does not really justify or account for human cognition and consciousness. And since it's only dealing with consciousness, it cannot give us the how and the why. Why us? Why would a panpsychistic reality or a panpsychistic, I think that's what you would call it, reality grant us consciousness? that is different than the other creatures on the planet, animals. Well, it's absurd. You run into absurdism. And how? How did conscious come to be? It came to be because it came to be. That's all it does. Panpsychism leaves you hopeless. It just came to be because that's how nature, okay, or panpsychism is. That's all it answers. It's a cyclical fallacy. It does not give us a justification. But with God, a divine reality that is beyond the physical and the metaphysical, something that is you cannot imagine. Okay? That divine supreme being put the conscious into us. How, we do not know, but he put it. At least that's an explanation. Okay? And why is so we can recognize him and worship him. There's a summary in a science journal. It goes like this. Okay? While militant atheists like Richard Dawkins may be convinced God doesn't exist, God, if he is around, may be amused to find that atheists might not exist. Cognitive scientists are becoming increasingly aware that a metaphysical outlook may be so deeply ingrained in human thought processes that it cannot be expunged. While this idea may seem outlandish, after all, it seems easy to decide not to believe in God. Evidence from several disciplines indicates that what you actually believe is not a decision you make for yourself. Your fundamental beliefs are decided by much deeper levels of consciousness, and some may well be more or less set in stone. This line of thought has led some scientists claiming that atheism is psychologically impossible because of the way humans think, says Graham Lawton, an avowed atheist himself, writing in The New Scientists. They point to studies showing, for example, that even people who claim to be committed atheists tactically hold religious beliefs such as the existence of an immortal soul. This shouldn't come as a surprise, since we are born believers, not atheists. Scientists say humans are pattern seekers from birth, with a belief in karma or cosmic justice as our default setting. A slew of cognitive traits predisposes us to faith, writes Pascal Boyer in Nature, the science journal, adding that people are only aware of some of their religious ideas. Okay, so this is basically, there's no escape. I mean, like I say, they're trying to slowly but surely come to the belief that there is a God by first being naturalist, then pantheism, then panpsychism, and eventually it's going to be monotheism. What else do you have? And some people want to be transcendentalism, you know, and all these isms. Just drop it, man. God exists, and that's the bottom line, and that's the best explanation we have. But y'all mesotheists. Y'all mesotheists. So, yeah, it's embedded in us. This is the fitra, pretty much. The fitra tells us that God exists, and cosmic justice entails that we also have free will. If we see cosmic justice, this shows that we made a divine covenant. This entails that innately we know that there was a divine covenant, and that's why someone transgresses the bounds. We demand for justice because it's embedded in us to want justice. So anyways, I know I jumped off a bit to a different point, but you cannot justify panpsychism and pantheism and have him as an answer that accounts for human consciousness and cognition. It's cyclical, and it doesn't make sense. It's like saying we have consciousness because we have consciousness, or we have consciousness because nature is panpsychistic, or because of panpsychism, or pantheism. It doesn't make sense, and it's not equivalent to say monotheism, because monotheism gives us the why and the how rationally. It gives us answers. It justifies everything holistically. Anyways, I hope this makes sense to people. If it doesn't, I'll try to come up with a better explanation in the future. Peace out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.